Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today we are talking the Stella Prize, which is sort of the Australian equivalent of the Women's Prize, except it's broader because it also includes gender diverse authors, and it also isn't just a fiction prize, it's a prize that is also looking at non-fiction and poetry as well. So in many ways, it's I would say one of my favourite prizes that I've sort of come across. And I always have a good time when I'm reading the Stella Prize long-listed and shortlisted titles. Not that I've enjoyed every single one, but they're good lists, interesting lists, and I come across things that I haven't come across before, and yeah, this year has been no exception. And the reason I am recording this video now, today, it is the 23rd of, is it? 23rd? Yes? Yes, 23rd of May, and tonight at 5 p.m. Australian, I'm assuming Eastern Standard Time, the prize is the winner is going to be declared. And I finished the last of the shortlisted books in terms of my reading a couple of days ago, but haven't had a chance to film anything. So I wanted to do this before I hear who the winner is so that I can give you my thoughts about those books. Hopefully I'll be able to get this video up before the winner is announced, but we'll see. Otherwise you'll be hearing about this just after it's been announced. So let me go through the books that I've read from the shortlist. But before we do that, I'm going to start with one that I've read that was on the long list that didn't make it. So this is a book I read before the shortlist got announced. I read two. One made it, one didn't make it to the shortlist. So let's talk about this one first. It is A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle. This is a really devastating book, I would say, and it has lots of themes in it. Basically, we follow a young girl who is discovering her sexuality. She is attracted to women, and she lives in a very conservative time and place within Australia. And she ends up getting found out by her parents, who essentially kick her out in very violent circumstances. And so she's sort of on the street, and then she hitches a ride and makes her way towards Sydney, which is the city in which I live in Australia, and it's kind of more of a case of like a found family situation, community and so on. And because of the timing of the novel as well, it's because I believe it starts off in the 1980s. Sorry, I'm wrong, 1972. But then goes through, into the 80s, 90s and to today. So obviously there are some, really huge LGBTQIA plus milestones that happen within that period of time. So, for example, the police violence, the establishment of the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras, like the initial one, which is a huge event now, but has been going for decades. The AIDS crisis. So there's all sorts of things like that that are explored in this book, and it's just beautiful. I really, really loved it. Yeah, there was also some of the other characters, so not our main character, but some of the characters that she meets when she comes to Sydney. It includes people of colour, including Aboriginal people, and there were some themes explored around racism towards Aboriginal people as well. So the only thing that I didn't love about this was that the ending felt a little bit rushed, and sorry, I tell a lot. I've been saying that it's been following one person, but it isn't. It's following two, and then towards the end, their stories intertwine, and in that moment when the stories, finally kind of intertwine, it just felt really rushed, and so therefore I didn't really kind of believe it with the same kind of level of believability that I had kind of carried throughout the rest of the book. But I did cry. I wept, in fact, at times in this book, you know, and was saying, no, 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 you know, as things were about to happen. So, you know, it definitely touched me, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. So this was the one to beat. So let's find out if I felt if any of the others were as good. The other book that I read before the shortlist got announced that did make it through to the shortlist was The Burrow by Melanie Cheng. This is one that I liked but didn't love. It explored some quite dark topics, including infant death, infidelity, and also it was set during the COVID lockdown. So if that's triggering for you, as it kind of is for me, this might be one to avoid. But I would say that the topics are, even though the topics are quite dark, they're explored with quite a light touch. And that's perhaps because it's centered around a rabbit. So basically we have a small family who end up buying a little rabbit during lockdown for their kid, and things kind of center around their family dynamics and, I guess, communication breakdown and so on. But yeah, I didn't really warm to the characters. I think that's the reason that I didn't really connect with this one. And I also didn't quite believe the point of view of the 10-year-old daughter, because this is, if memory serves, because I read this right back at the beginning of April, if memory serves, it goes between their points of view in the book, and when it was the voice of the 10-year-old, I just didn't really believe it was a 10-year-old. So yeah, that's why it didn't connect as well with me. But I gave it 3.5 stars, so it wasn't a bad book. It just didn't connect in the same way that A Language of Limbs connected with me. So that was The Burrow. The next book that I read from the shortlist was this one, Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser. Now, I have read a Michelle de Kretser book before. Let me see if there's a list of them at the beginning here. I read Scary Monsters, which was shortlisted a couple of years ago for the Stella Prize, and I didn't really enjoy that one. So I didn't go into this with high hopes, I'll be honest with you. However, and despite a bit of a weird beginning to this book, I did actually grow to really like it. We're following a young woman who moves away from her very conservative migrant parents to go to university in Melbourne in the 1980s. And so she's a young woman of colour, and she is studying Virginia Woolf, who she greatly admires, and sort of is grappling with, you know, really universal stuff like, you know, being a young woman and exploring who you are as a person and relationships and your values and things like that. But then also there is an element of race being explored here too, and sort of how that intersects with all of those things that are really universal experiences of being a young person. So, you know, this explores themes of feminism, the experiences of migrant children, racism, and just being young. Like, as I said before, those were really clear themes that came out to me. This book really made me think, and I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. So it was really good. And I'm glad to realize that maybe my initial experience with Michelle de Kretser is not going to necessarily be the same with all of her books, because I enjoyed this one much more. The next book that I read from the shortlist was Translations by Jumana Abdu. This was a book I wasn't initially interested in, but I picked it up because it was shortlisted. And I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed the book, because, again, I went into it not expecting that I was going to like it. There were a few elements that didn't quite work for me. so sometimes the language was a bit over the top, like it was a bit flowery, and some of the conflicts between the characters felt over the top as well, while other issues kind of resolved too quickly, in my opinion. It was too long also, and there was a relationship between two of the characters, two female characters, Alia and Hannah, that just didn't make any sense to me. So before I give you my final thoughts on the book, let me tell you what it's about, because I forgot to do that. So essentially we're following a woman who, I believe she's Muslim. She's definitely from a non-white background, and she moves, within Australia, moves from kind of a city to a small country town to kind of set up a life after, or in the process of, divorcing her ex-husband, and she has a young daughter as well. So they head out and get established. She, I think her father dies at the beginning, and so she's got an inheritance, and she uses that to buy property, you know, sort of a small farm, I guess. And she, you know, has these ideas about how she's going to do it up and, you know, establish herself, get involved in her community and that sort of thing. And so it's sort of the process of doing that, I guess, with the added layer of being from a non-white background in an Australian country town, which, if you've been to Australian country towns, often are very predominantly white people. So, you know, being from a different background could potentially be an issue in such a kind of closed, small community. So it's sort of looking at all of those kind of things, which was really interesting. So I listed out some things I didn't like about the book, and yet I actually really liked the book. So I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. It exceeded my expectations, so that was very exciting. The next one that I read, and we've gone past the halfway point now. That's 3 I've told you about from the shortlist. So this next one is Cactus Pear for My Beloved by Samar Sabawi. And this was an interesting one because it's kind of a memoir / biography. So the author is interviewing her elderly father. Their family is of Palestinian background. They now live in Australia. So she's interviewing her father, sort of. I think the premise of it is because she's going to do some kind of thesis, or, you know, that's what she's writing at a university level, wanting to write about his experiences, because he lived through a lot of the conflict in Palestine, you know, sort of a lot of the kind of key touchstones of that history. And so she wants to write about him. So the beginning part of the book, and then also the end part, you kind of come back to it, is her, like, in the present day, talking to her father in a shopping centre where they've, you know, gone to have a coffee or something. But then she goes into the kind of more biography side of things, and that is told in a much more kind of storytelling way. And this is something that I always struggle with when we've got a book that is essentially non-fiction, but it includes fictional elements. I think it can be done well, but I'm not sure that this book got there for me, unfortunately. Yeah, so because she included stuff that could not possibly have been his memory, because she starts from before he's even born. So they're family stories, which is fine because he probably was telling her the family stories. But then she's added in elements as well that she, you know, in hindsight, we know this is what was going on at that time. But obviously you were a 10-year-old child, so, you know, you couldn't have possibly had that level of understanding of what was happening around you. So she's included more stuff in there, which I think is obviously necessary, but I just think the way, because it's done in this storytelling, it doesn't feel like it's real. It doesn't feel like it's a true account of what happened. And so, yeah. But I also think in some ways that kind of that kind of approach is also a little bit of a Trojan horse situation where it's just a story. It feels like it's a story, but actually you're learning a lot of stuff, which was definitely the case for me. You know, I do have some knowledge about the history of the conflict in Palestine, but I learnt things from reading this book. So in that way, you know, maybe that was the intention of the author. I'm not sure. And I think because of that, like, Trojan horse element of the things that you can kind of sneak in to a sort of rollicking story, that kind of jumped it up from maybe a 3 to a 3.5 for me. The other thing that was a bit of a problem, and this is audiobook specific because that's how I read this one, is that the audiobook narrator, when she's doing the voice of the father when he's a kid, the voice she does is really annoying, and it made me not like the kid, which I don't think would have happened if I'd been reading on the page, because I wouldn't have had the annoying tone of voice in my ears. So that really didn't help, unfortunately, when I was reading this one. But I gave it 3.5 stars, and I think it was definitely a solid book, but it wasn't really something that... It's a style that I don't prefer, personally. Okay, the last two. And I have copies of these ones. These are ones I read with my eyes. So the first one is... we're up to book... this is the 5th of the 6 shortlisted books, but the 6th of the Stella books that I've read. So this one's called Black Witness by Amy McQuire. Amy McQuire is an Aboriginal journalist who's been working in the industry in Australia for decades, and this was really a powerful work of journalism. It brought together essays and also previously published pieces, you know, journalistic pieces from various publications to tell the story of the media's ongoing refusal to pay any heed to black witnesses. So the first half of this book, so she's divided it up into 2 sections. You can see I've got lots of tabs here. So she's divided it up into White Witness, the first 8 chapters, and then Black Witness is the remainder of the book. And the way that she kind of describes that is her kind of grappling with, and because she does little intros to the pieces as well sometimes, but she is sort of talking about, you know, the sort of the differences in point of view. So the first essays are sort of like examples of where white witnesses have been believed over black witnesses in and that in at times in her storytelling, because these are previously published articles, etc. It really kind of focuses in more on like analyzing what the media is doing, I guess, in these circumstances and how these stories are getting told, which I found really interesting. Like, it was a really kind of deep dive exploration of that happening, and with lots and lots of different examples over time. And the second half, that's under the title of Black Witness, is kind of more accounts of things from the perspective of Aboriginal people. So things she's reported on that maybe didn't get as much mainstream media coverage, or maybe you know, just the way that she's doing the telling is very much more focusing on what black people are saying to her as the journalist, or, you know, in her kind of exploration of what's happened, she's, you know, kind of lifted the voices of other Aboriginal people. So yeah, it was really powerful and very compelling. I personally thought that the first half of the book was more compelling, and I think that maybe that's because it was there were a lot more longer form essays there, so they were longer pieces, and I guess in that type of journalism you kind of get to deep dive a little bit more on things, and I learnt a lot from those sections, whereas the second half were a lot more shorter form pieces, so the chapters are a lot shorter for the most part, and also there was a little bit of repetition because of overlaps in the types of stories that she was writing about. And I mean, I can see why they were all included, but it did mean that, you know, because she's written them all for different publications at different times, she sometimes uses the same examples, or she refers to things multiple times, and so it added an element of repetition there that kind of, I think, detracted a little bit from the power in the second half of this book. Yeah, I think this overall was a really important book, and I'm really glad I read it. I learnt a lot from reading it. I think she's a great writer, and I think this is really essential reading for Australians in particular, to kind of grapple with the news that we hear, as well as, you know, taking an active stance to find other voices and other perspectives on those news stories. Yeah, so I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It was really great, and I would recommend it highly. Okay, the very last one. Is anything going to beat my 4.5 that I gave to the first book that didn't make the shortlist? This is the last one, and that is Black Convicts by Santilla. And I don't know how to say the surname of the author. I apologize. I should have looked that up before I started. Chingai Ipe, maybe? I'm not sure. So this is a book, sorry, it's called Black Convicts, How Slavery Shaped Australia. And the author is it lives in Australia, but she's of Zambian heritage, and she is essentially in the introduction to this book starts by saying that she didn't start out as a historian, but sort of through little discoveries she got intrigued by the story, finding out that some of the convicts, and if you know anything about the history of Australia, you will know that we are a colonised country, a colony of Britain, and that we began our relationship with Britain as a destination for convicts, for prisoners, to come and essentially give their labour because they had been convicted of a crime in either in Britain or in one of Britain's other colonies, and would, you know, come over to Australia and be forced to work and essentially establish, you know, build buildings and pave roads and things like that. So what the author discovered was that there were Black people among the people who were sent out as convicts, and that wasn't something that she had ever heard of before, when kind of discussing the history of Australia and the history of convict transportation. And that sort of sent her on this mission to kind of find out who these people were that were transported to Australia, these Black people. And so, yeah, it was a really well-researched book about convicts, and these were mostly convicts of African descent, and they were former slaves, or, you know, people who kind of came to be in the realm of the British Empire, probably that way, or by being born to a parent who was a slave. Yeah, so inevitably this book ended up also being a lot about slavery, and specifically colonial slavery and British colonial slavery, and also its aftermath. So when laws were passed or changes were made, you know, what happened in those societies to the people who had formerly been enslaved. So yeah, it was really interesting. I learnt a lot, and I feel much better informed about this topic now than I was before. And I really appreciated the approach that the author took to this content. She only very occasionally indulged in projecting you know, feelings, etc., onto historic figures that we can never really know, you know, and that's, I think it's a trend that is kind of happening a lot these days in a lot of the historical, you know, non-fiction books that I've read about people, because there's this desire to learn about people that we haven't previously heard about or don't know much about, and yet it can be really easy to project our own feelings and our own sensibilities and the kind of social constructs of our day onto those people, when they probably weren't thinking the same way that we think, because of the times in which they lived. And I really appreciated that she didn't indulge in that too often. Yeah, instead she just really contextualized what they might have been going through, you know, with the information that we did have, that she was able to find, and then made inferences based on the context of what was going on more broadly in the area where they were and in the world in general. And I really prefer that as an approach to gaps in the archives, because it is an issue. And it really also was interesting to kind of hear about, like, you know, how she really made a point about how archives are not, they are not neutral. What gets stored, what gets thrown away. People have made decisions along the way in the creation of that archive and the keeping of that archive of what to keep and what not to include, who to bother to talk to, who to bother to ask things of, to put into that archive. So archives are not neutral, and that was a really interesting point that she really emphasized in this book, and I think it illustrated it beautifully with the examples that she gave. So this was really great, but I gave it 4.25 stars. So it actually did not quite get there for me in terms of beating the one that didn't make it. However, this would be my, of the 6 that did make it to the shortlist, Black Convicts would be my pick for my favourite, and the one that I hope will be the winner when we hear about it tonight. But I would equally, I think, be happy with Black Witness, if Black Witness is the one. I think I would also be really happy if Michelle de Kretser gets it with Theory and Practice, because I think this is a really interesting book too. Yeah, but I mean, good luck to all of the authors. I think it's one of those things when you're reading a shortlist for a prize. Like, I didn't rate anything below 3.5 in this batch of the 6 books. So, you know, to me that says, like, this is a good shortlist. This is a shortlist. There's no, like, duds here. But, like, because of the quality of the books that we're reading, you know, it really just kind of comes down to those, like, little personal preferences for how things go. And, you know, I think they're all strong writers, and I'm, you know, wish them all luck tonight. So I'm looking forward to finding out who the winner is. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye.